All right. Welcome to another podcast. Today we're going to talk about user experience or UX. So why don't I let Naveen first define what he actually thinks UX means?
I'm not a UX guy, but I think of it as, now I'm working a bit on UX. I think of it as the way that I experience interacting with something that I consume. So it's like, let's see, I want to go microwave something. I want to microwave some popcorn. Like, what are the things that I'm going to have to, that's all I have in mind, right? I just want to have my stuff. I want to nuke some popcorn. What are the steps involved to do that? And how did this product help me accomplish what I was trying to do?
Okay. And what would you call a UI then? What is the difference between UX and UI?
So UX, I think, and by the way, I wonder if anybody out there is a UX person and I'm wrong, like please let us know. But I think of it as UI is then the interface by which I accomplish the outcome that I'm trying to get. So in the case of the microwave, the user interface is a series of buttons. You know, it's the screen. It's even the little button that opens the door itself, like all the things that I interact with to do what I'm trying to do.
And what is information architecture then?
Oh God, I'm learning this one now. So this is new to me too, but it's the way to organize how it is that I, as a human now interacting with, I guess again, my microwave, I'm going to think about organization of the information I need to accomplish what I want. So again, I'm trying to microwave some popcorn. I need a way to open the door. So that should probably be a very simple, high-level thing. Like it would be really annoying to everyone if you had to go into the open door option button and then click it. Would you like to open the door? Yes, that sucks. And so what you do is you take those high-level things and put it higher up on the information architecture. It's readily available. It's right there. And then I might want to do things like, usually I just want to microwave something for 30 seconds. So maybe that's a top-level action. And then you start still giving me the ability to do more complex things, but maybe I have to dig a little bit deeper to do that. Like, what's the route by which I figure out how to defrost my chicken in the microwave? It's not something you do all the time, but sometimes you're going to want to. How am I going to think about the interface so I can naturally kind of get to what I'm trying to accomplish?
Okay.
I don't know if that matches what you think, by the way. I'm new to this. So.
Yeah, look, I would summarize to say UX equals UI plus information architecture, right? Like those two things equal UX. If that was like...
It's so funny because that's the architect definition of it, but...
So I would be like, it's those two things, but then I'm like, wait a minute. It's pure. We tend to think about UI, or when we just say UX... there's like, what's the API format, right?
Yeah.
So we tend to also, so I think there's the human interaction interface of UX, which is, I think, UI plus information architecture.
Yes.
How does that change when you move to a programming interface? And are there a different set of primitives and a different way of thinking about programming interfaces?
Yeah, totally. And to me, and maybe I'm a little bit more heretical here, like I don't think those two are the same or even similar or should share similarities. So if I'm trying to program something, I want first of all, I'm probably a lot more willing to deal with a very long laundry list of options because I want to make sure that I can be precise about what I'm trying to accomplish. I want to be programmatic. I want to make sure that, so for example, let's go back to the microwave thing, right? I want to create a way to automatically microwave popcorn, right? It's like, I need a way to know, open door. Did that happen? Because I'm not there. I'm a machine interacting with that. I would need error codes. I need to know that if something did go wrong, like what are my options? There's a lot more optionality, and I think it needs to be a lot more discrete in terms of what is happening. And so I guess that's my long way of saying I'm much more willing to read like a specification manual on how to interact with an API. Swagger spec is a common thing, so that's a way to specify your APIs. I don't think it's as important to think about things like, oh, open door should be a very obvious thing to do because, that's a step, but it's just a step in the process of the API flow. There's a lot of things. And by the way, you're programming this, you're probably more likely to do the complicated thing, maybe not the simple thing. So I think there's like a lot of just differences in what you're trying to do when you come at it from a programmatic perspective versus a human perspective.
Well, I'll give an example because I'm going to go back to my engineering days. I was around in the early days of web development to mobile development. In the early days, all the APIs for information into the web were fairly big and broad. In Java, you would have like 100 fields, send everything to the front end. Yeah. This was before like asynchronous page loading. Right? So you would have long page load times.
Fair.
Right? And then when mobile came around and the network bandwidth, this was like 3G or even 2G. I don't even remember what G we were on in the early days of like BlackBerry programming. It was like thin out, like REST was too heavy. So it's like JSON and OData and all these formats came out because network bandwidth was a problem.
Yep.
So then it was like minimum number of fields, minimum envelope, minimum communication format, lots of small APIs.
Yeah.
Only make the narrowest packet to interact with and send high traffic flow with micro packets back and forth. So the reason for APIs being thin and narrow was because of the programming bottlenecks of the time.
Yep.
And then when web started introducing asynchronous frame loading, then you started bringing those mobile concepts back to web.
True.
Right? So I tend to agree with you that we should separate experience as a category.
Right.
This was a hierarchy. Experience is at the top. There's two completely different experience universes. Human and machine.
Yep. And actually, even when you said API, because actually we should be more specific about API, because some of the API you were describing is actually the API to the user experience of a human using a browser, right?
Yeah.
Or a web app or whatever. And there are some conventions we've learned there. Like, for example, let's say you're interacting with ChatGPT, right? You have kind of your list of conversations on the left. Well, the back end of the browser needs to call an API to get those. It should probably have just a list API of list conversations or list history. Don't tell me the details of all of them because that's annoying and it'd be slow. Just tell me that they exist and maybe what their name is. If the user then clicks on that, then give me a get this conversation history and let me load that, right? And that leads to this network efficiency you're talking about.
But is that also the information architecture?
So I think it derives from the user experience, the human user experience information architecture. I think there's a separate class of APIs. And by the way, I think AI is kind of, in my theory, going to shake up how APIs work, which is I'm trying to write or create automation to manipulate whatever this thing is. And sometimes network bandwidth is not always the problem there, right?
Yep.
Sometimes I just want to know, like, I need to be able to tell you what I'm going to do from anywhere, right? I don't need to walk through the browser to get there, right? I might know exactly what I'm trying to do. And so sometimes optionality is more important on the API side for automation that may never manifest through a GUI, right?
Well, so let's think about tasks to be done then, instead of thinking about APIs. You have human-oriented or programmatic machine-oriented.
Yes, I think that's a good way to
right? And in the human-oriented world, we're saying, okay, there is a UX, which equals information architecture plus UI plus some way of API and communicating.
Yep.
Right? Those things is one universe of problems. And those parallels exist in machine experience, right? And that would be, okay, maybe not a UI, maybe there is a information architecture.
Yep.
Maybe there is, a machine workflow of some task to be done.
Yep.
And some API architecture thing, right?
And there could be power users there too. So for example, when people start doing automation, That's where you're more likely to have someone who wants to go behind the scenes a little bit. So this would be a terrible example, and hopefully no microwave actually lets you do this. But maybe I'm like, well, this is a 1,000-watt microwave, but I want to be able to like go in and override it and run it at 1,400 watts because there's a way to do that. And I know if I run that for only 10 seconds, it's safe.
That's what people do with overclocking on CPUs.
Exactly, right?
Why are we overclocking?
Or even like people doing stuff with cars, right? There's these little there's a standard interface to interact with the computers inside of your car. You can do things like for a combustion engine, change engine timing, things like that. None of that is available to a human driving the car, right? But to someone who wants to get to the automation, they need those APIs. They need the ability to do that stuff, right? Yeah. Or even just get diagnostics, like is your O2 sensor working, right? So I think when you get to the automation world, there's just a much more diverse set of things you can do, and they tend to be deeper.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of bring up something we saw earlier this week. So Ratender sent us a little doc of creating a nice human interface for his Netgear router using MCP.
Yeah.
So you could hack his router.
Yeah.
Right?
And we should introduce MCP, right? So,
yeah.
So,
go ahead.
Model Context Protocol, right? Is that the acronym? And it's essentially a way of, I guess, creating a standard way of defining a API, regardless of how the API was designed, in a way that's kind of human readable. So the model would say, okay, this is kind of what this thing does. This is how it communicates. This is what its responses are. This is what it expects, and it's kind of English-ish.
Yeah, resources, prompts, functions, right? The prompts are more English-ish.
Yeah.
Resources is what I do.
And the reason why I think this is interesting is because then, since LLMs are very language-based in the way that they work, it fits kind of nicely into a large language model like ChatGPT, and it can kind of interact with these.
Okay, so if English is your user experience, right, or your GUI, right, how does that change the way you would think about user experience design, right? Because we've always thought about user experience design as fixed.
Yep.
You're looking at something, there's a GUI and an information architecture.
Yep.
What is a chat window? What does that mean?
Okay, this is where I'm going to go out on a limb. I think so. Right now, we're in this phase, and I think you think this too. We're in this phase where we do everything through a chat window because GPT is a novel thing, and we suddenly realized, hey, there's this thing that could communicate with me in natural language. But dear God, a chat window is a horrible user interface, right? Like,
it's clippy.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go back to the microwave example. Like, if someone puts an LLM in and by the way, I just saw that there was a smart barbecue. It's just like, I mean, these things are appearing everywhere. If you give me a conversational interface to my microwave, I'm going to be the angriest customer on the planet. I'm like, I don't want to talk to my microwave.
What if you made it voice?
Like, again, no.
Don't burn my popcorn.
Exactly, right?
Cook my popcorn faster.
I'm willing to bet somebody out there is considering this type of thing for appliances. Like, we might see a washing machine that has this kind of stuff, right? I think we're getting lazy at that point, right? Because for a lot of things that are user experience oriented, we have very clear goals. We're trying to just do something. We want it to be as simple as possible. To me, conversation is like trying to tell you to do what I want to get done. It's like, Prakash, I'd like to make some popcorn. Can you make sure that, most of the popcorn kernels are popped and blah, blah, blah.
Okay, look, I'm going to agree with you on principle, right? But I actually do think that it's going to be, remember how we separated the world into like GUI and then machine, like people versus machine? I think people to people will communicate in English or a language.
That language.
People to machine, I generally think you're right. Like in the people to machine, you're like, yeah, a lot of things I don't want to chat or voice or whatever. I do tend to think we're in an over-rotation period there.
Yep.
Now, I do think that like previously, machine to machine was a tight, trusted relationship of APIs that had strict consistency in communication.
I see.
And in machine-to-machine communication and automation, I do think that if you disintermediate APIs and communication to have loose consistency, there's a lot of automation problems
Yes.
that would benefit from domain spaces
Yes.
that are just communicating that way.
Okay, I'll lean into that, but then I'm again going to go back to why I think it's us being lazy. So I think here's an example. I would love, and I'm sure there's a way to do this. I'm just too lazy. I would love for it to be when I come home, my house detects that I'm there. It turns on the lights. It does the various things that I'm about to do. Maybe I like to have tea before I go to bed. It starts heating up my tea, and my bath is getting warm, like whatever, like all the things that I just walk around and I now have this smart home, right? But I didn't have to program it. I had a way of starting to just through English describe what I'd like to have it happen whenever I walk home, or again, and so on. And I can do some of these things. And there's already if IFFT, right? If this, then that. Or
Yeah, IFFT.
Yeah. And so there's tools like this, and I'm aware, just like I don't want to program at home. I already do this stuff at work, right? And if there was a conversational way for me to make this easy, I might use it. Right?
Well, so I'm big into home automation, so it's an interesting analogy. I use SmartThings. I have a GUI on my phone where, without programming, low code, I can set up rules. If, then, else. I guess it's light programming.
Yeah.
But if I'm within 5 miles from my home, based on the geofence of my iPhone, trigger my lights, do this, walk in, turn it off 10 minutes later, all of my devices, light switches, smart appliances are all in the SmartThings ecosystem.
Okay.
Right? IFFT is a way of integrating those smart devices on a standard. But I have to be predefined of it, and I have to go, and the GUI is a little bit cumbersome.
Yep.
So I do think I would like, just be like, nah, I want this. Oh, I changed my mind. Or as I come home, I'm like, oh, it took too long to turn off lights. Fix that, Alexa,
Yeah.
So I think that's a better thing. But if my natural language was communicating directly to IFFT and there wasn't middleware, I think all sorts of bad things would happen. So my prediction of where human to machine is going is human communication to machine will go through signed workflows and paths that are predefined, right? Here's a subroutine, and then large language models will use predefined subroutines versus directly talking to the machines
I see.
when you want a consistent experience.
Yep.
If your goal is perfection and consistency from an architecture standpoint,
Yep.
you would do it that way. If your goal is the machines are all around you, sensing you, discovering and making your life better, I think you will have lower level machine-to-machine things, and the experience may change, but the problem is we as humans think we know what we want, but based on our brain behavior, we get conditioned into comfort and patterns. So the human mind doesn't like variance on things that aren't important. The brain chemistry of signal to noise comes from understanding that new experiences are a change deviation between your standard experiences, right? So I do think over time, there will be some problems where machine to machine are communicating for inconsistency where there is no human in the loop. The closer you add to humans, I think you're going to have to mediate through strict workflows of things to contain the variance.
And so are you sort of, I'm trying to understand are you suggesting that, so we went back to, I said, okay, APIs today for programmatic use,
Yeah.
they're very detail oriented and they're very power user oriented. And are you suggesting that with the advent of kind of MCP and the way we're trying to stitch things together, that there's going to be this new programmatic interface, which is you're trying to accomplish a kind of a coarse task that I can accomplish. So, the light analogy, it's like I guess that one's a simple one, so that's not a great example. But make my bath warm, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like heat up the bath. Like maybe you don't want to specify exactly the temperature, but they're make it bath temperature, right?
Yeah.
And maybe you create interfaces like that, which are kind of coarser. It doesn't get into all the specificity of like how long should the water be on?
Yeah.
How should, like, is that kind of what you're getting at? And then from that, we start being able to create, more interesting.
So in smart home, which is a good example, I think that's how it'll go. I think you'll have primitives of things, and all the details can be loosely consistent iterating and learning, but you won't end up with your house taking over, right? Because you're going through controlled interfaces in some type of middleware. Smart Things is my middleware ecosystem right now.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm also cautiously fearful of where the automation world is going, because the more things we we enable to the machine, the stranger things might get. But yes, things are clearly happening. I mean, MCP is new, and this is already exploding, right? So we'll have to see.
Okay, so let's make it more practical now. We went fairly theoretical. So what is a good user experience? Like, give me an example of something you think is a great user experience, and conversely, you think is a terrible user experience.
A great user experience. I'm trying to think of something that I do every day that I almost never think of, right? So to me, the best user experience is I don't even know it's there, right? Like it's invisible to me. So what's a great example of that? I have to brew on that for a minute. It's not something that I know is there, but I would actually say that something that I think about every day. I'm just thinking of something I use in my day. It's like my Apple Watch, right? It does a lot of stuff, but it also does it very invisibly to me. So okay, what do I want it to do?
Mm-hmm.
I want it to tell time. Cool, it does that. I want it to now that it's got all these sensors and things like that, I want it to help keep track of my heart rate and my activity and all of that. It doesn't ask me to do any of that. It just does it. It's available should I want it on my app. It has my calendar on there, and so when I need to be somewhere, it does let me know. It's like you have a meeting coming up. I could check that. Shows me the weather. Like, it's all just very intuitive and right there. So I think that's a great interface, right? I don't actually do anything other than just look at my watch.
So do you think, Apple Watch is interesting, right? It's minimally invasive.
Exactly.
Right? But for most people, that's great, but it does let you make it more invasive. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Right? You can make it
more in your face.
Yeah. Should we allow that?
I think there's some. I have a horror story of my uncle, or I guess my wife's uncle, got a message on his watch while he goes on long bike rides. I was like, "What is this?" And then hit an obstacle and broke his back. It's like, okay, that's bad. That shouldn't do that, right? I mean, or you're driving and it's like pinging at you, and you're just like, "I'm driving, man. Like, leave me alone." So I think all these UX concepts of trying to grab the user and get their attention, like that's company-driven UX, not human-driven UX. So,
look, I think I would agree with you. My philosophy in UX is minimally invasive, largely absolutely simple, no options.
Yep.
Right? And if you need to do something, progressive disclosure only when allowed, like very minimalist.
Yep.
Right.
But I do want to go to the one with bad interface, and then I'm going to ask you a question, which is, I also think it's important not to reinvent things that people understand. And this could be me starting to get older and getting curmudgeon-y, right? But like, I've learned how doors work. I've learned how light switches work. Like, don't change that stuff on me. Like, am I the only person who doesn't know how to get out of a Tesla?
Yeah.
Like, I sit down in a Tesla. If I get an Uber and it's a Tesla, and I'm just like, oh man, this is going to happen again. I'm not going to know how to get out of the car. And I can't like internalize in my head that it's a button. Like, you push a button to get out of the car, and there's no handle. But like, every time I get out, I'm going to look for a handle, and I'm going to be like, how do I get out of this car? It's like, why? Why is this redone, right? And maybe there's going to be some glorious future where all cars are opened by buttons, and I'm going to be the old guy. But like, to me, that's bad user experience. Is just reinventing things for the sake of reinventing them.
Yeah, look, I think we said a good UX is intuitive and minimally invasive, right? The problem is when you're changing and disrupting.
Yeah.
The disruption could be intuitive, or it could move you towards more non-intuitive. I would argue the Tesla door is moving you towards a more non-intuitive place, right? I just can't see anyone with a rational argument around why that's a better feature.
Yeah, let's work through this. I'm trying to open a door. I am moving my hand towards said door. Like, I already have momentum. Like, handles kind of are a natural interface. A button? Anyway, I could stop my rant there.
Yeah.
But I guess I wanted to ask you, like, just on the concept of reinvention or whatever, how do you think, there are lots of bad UXs out there, and as a product person, or as we are trying to drive all these things, when is it worth rethinking how we do UX? Like, where is that in the priority order?
That's a tough one. So I think there's probably two dimensions, right? And I think about UX the same way I think about code and architecture. When I used to be a programmer, I used to be fairly opinionated around how long does this need to live? Because I just feel like everything entropies over time. There's always a better way to do something tomorrow than there is today.
Yeah.
You're working with the best available thing that's available to you. And sometimes you have to write something. If it's in a physical device on a bridge, you're like, 1,000 years. Got it. In the discipline of engineering, I want this bridge to be alive 1,000 years from now.
Right.
That goes into the cement and the chemistry and the structural engineering and all of that, right?
That's a good point.
So the more physical things are, we tend to think longer time horizons. The problem is software engineers don't think like engineers. They think like coders.
Yeah.
So if you apply an engineering principle to user experience or code,
Yeah.
how long is good, right? Everything entropies over time. And to some degree, let's just state like horizons, right? So, okay, this is a thing, don't know the longevity of it. The standard answer is like, 3 years. If I have to rewrite this or look at this for another 3 years, that's a waste.
That's what. Yeah.
And Bob Wood used to say this. We used to talk about this in engineering, right? Like, how much time do you allow for soaking a new code? And he's like, it should be 10%. So he's like, if you're coding one day, right? That's 24 hours? Then 2.4 hours is your soak time. If it's 2 years, right, then it's 10% of that.
I see.
Right? So, it's related to how much time and effort you put into it.
And how long you want the thing to last.
And how long you want the thing to last. The longer you want it to last, the more you need to measure before you cut, right, in terms of the UI design. I find right now, from my experience in SaaS and enterprise software, the best things last about 10 years, right? UIs and GUIs.
Yeah.
Like, so if your UI and GUI doesn't look dated in 10 years, you've done a great job.
Yeah, that's
right.
That's
I'm just like looking at this as a thing.
Yeah, that's
right. If it's 20, I was like, how the hell did you do that? Like, did you have AI that learns and changes the UI? Because like everything gets dated. Technology moves. You have access.
Yeah.
And part of it depends on the domain space as well, because as you go more consumer, UI takes more of a fashion trend. It's like what's hot right now.
Yeah.
Like is the black on white hotter than white on black, right? Like that whole like what color schema do I use?
Yep.
And I don't even want to get into the debate, right? But like that's a fashion.
Well, dark mode is clearly
like it's a fashion statement. People have people like different clothes. People like different fashions, right? So I put that in the fashion category. So that's whatever. I don't even consider that part of UI. I consider that fashion. Maybe it's UX, UI, and fashion,
That's
right? Maybe we have to add a third bucket to these things saying that's not UI, that's fashion,
Yeah.
right? And fashion, whatever. If you want to make everyone happy, have some fashion options, whatever, right? Like,
how cool it looks. Yeah.
yeah. So, but like sometimes I remember cars where they were like square corners is cool, then rounded was cool, then squares came back, right? And then people were like, what about aerodynamics? And then like Tesla put a big flat thing on a Cybertruck and you're just like, what? So like,
Stainless steel was cool. Stainless steel wasn't cool. Stainless steel is cool again. Like,
right? Some of those things are not really user UI.
That's right.
It's not information architecture and it's not user experience. It's fashion,
Yep.
right? So I'd say that's how I look at things. Now, when do you decide to act on it, right? When should we do things? Because the problem is if you've built a complicated enterprise product over time, you now have it accumulates, it's bigger, and it's always like, there's always the debate from, do I incrementally chip away at it where parts of my product are new and shiny and parts of my product are dated? Or do I just wholesale start a next and lose a ton of features along the way?
Totally.
Right? Which I'll ask you, because I think I've asked you that a number of times, right? When do you start to next versus when do you incrementally chip away at a problem?
And I think starting next and fresh is always just terrifying, because I think it's just, as someone who's forced to kind of design things, I think incrementally feels safer. So it's always the safer choice. You can sort of evolve towards the thing, but you may never get to where you want to go. But so I think if you're trying to do something radical, probably starting from scratch is the way to go. If you basically gotten to the point where your UX is just, there's just so much in there, and trying to gradually reorganize it from an information architecture, like what's the most important thing, that's going to be hard to do. Maybe it's better to start from scratch and start just teaching people the new UX, right? But there's horror stories. Are you a Sonos customer?
I am a Sonos customer.
Did you hear what happened with, so Sonos redid their entire app to go from like Sonos S1 to like the new one. And they did a whole bunch of things. They changed the color theme, which was some fashion things, and that annoyed a bunch of people. But it also was redesigned such that it stopped supporting their old gear, and just led to just absolute chaos. Like their customers couldn't use the product anymore. It doesn't even work, right? It's a better UX, but I can't do what I need to do, right? So I think these are the dangers of new UXs. You have people who are using the thing, they know how to do it, and if you lose them, I mean, you just threw away the keys of the kingdom.
Well, let me see if I can define a rule. If you want to improve your UI, do it incrementally. If you need to add capability, do it incrementally. If your information architecture doesn't work, start over.
I think that's where I'm ending up. Yeah.
Yeah, and very rarely, is your information architecture not working black or white.
Yep.
You know what I mean? It's just like, okay, for the percentage of population of what we're trying to do or what we've achieved, what is the change impetus, why it no longer works?
Yeah.
Because your information architecture was built up over time rationally for a reason.
Yes.
Right? So
there has to be a reason. There's something you're trying to do that requires the new architecture, right? You want to think about things differently, right?
Yeah.
So that's the driving force.
So, and I think at Pure, I'll, bring up this last use case, Fusion, right? So at Pure Storage, we started building an array GUI, right? Then we said, okay, we want to think beyond the box. We're creating this concept called a fleet, and we're changing our information architecture.
100%.
Right? So, share your lessons learned in terms of how that journey is going and how you think about UX, UI, GUIs. What are your lessons learned? Because you're in the middle of it.
I am, yes. And I'd say that's an example of a paradigm shift. Right? Yeah. So we are in a world now where we've gone from, in the traditional storage and even infrastructure world, people were used to thinking about individual boxes, like appliances. Like, I plug this in, I know where it is, I physically touch it. I think of it as a separate entity, to a world where people want more, like, so if you talk about a fleet, what does that mean? They want to be able to use storage just more in a cohesive, collected way. They just want an S3 bucket. They just want a place to put their files. They're not as really connected to, I want it to be literally right here, right? And so, and when you get to that mindset, it's more of a, well, what do I want it to do? What policies do I want it to have? What properties do I want it to have? And I think that leads to such a fundamental shift in how you think about what you're interacting with, that now you end up with a different information architecture, right?
But then do you start, information architecture, or do you start with GUI, or do you start with...
You start with, now we can bring it all the way back, right? You start with user experience, right? Like, what is the person trying to do, right? It doesn't matter what I think it should look like. It matters of, am I helping them?
So you're saying you can't incrementally evolve from where you're coming.
I think yes, I think because you're trying to meet someone on a journey that's very different than where they start from the old way you used to do things, that I think, you just have to start over.
Okay, cool. Well, I think that's, probably a good recap of that. So final words, if you wanted to leave advice for people who are either UX designers, UI designers, product managers, or engineers trying to understand this topic, what are your words of wisdom you would share to the community?
I don't even know if it's wisdom, but everyone designing all that stuff. I mean, remember that you're interacting, especially if you're building a GUI, you're interacting with people. Just don't piss them off. Don't, upsell them. Don't make them click on things. Just because you think it's cool doesn't mean it's cool. Are you thinking about, put yourself in their shoes, and are you making something that actually helps them accomplish what they're trying to do?
Yeah.
Make it invisible.
Yeah, my advice is, when it comes to these things, UX researchers tend to be let's interview user communities. There's a famous cartoon where Homer Simpson gets to design a car, right? And it has all the features, and it is the most terrible car user experience you will ever end up with.
It has the most cup holders.
It has the most cup holders because that's what everyone says they want. You cannot build a intuitive user experience by listening to your end users. You can't. The whole paradigm of user experience research and the way it's done today, I think, is fundamentally broken if you want to design for intuitive. And I think Steve Jobs showed that with the iPhone secrecy design.
100%.
So, if you want to be, every UX designer wants to be a future Steve Jobs, follow the example. That's my advice.
Yeah, consider the user. Don't listen to the user.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Thanks.